Okay. Hello, everyone. My voice finds you again in a world that's spinning in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to speak. Excuse me. I'm a bit nasally today, but I'll continue. Pretty much in today's episode, I want to look into the idea of cultures, share some commentary, and to really wonder about the concept of freedom and how does it apply to a cultural entity inside a cultural program. So, first things first, let me read a definition of culture for the viewers. Culture, noun, the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. A refined understanding or appreciation of culture, the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social groups. In biology, the cultivation of bacteria, tissue cells, etc. in an artificial medium containing nutrients. And 4, the cultivation of plants. So I guess the first two are the key. So I guess I'll start in this way. And I want to read for the viewers a quote actually from Terence McKenna. Terence McKenna is one of the most alert human beings on the planet. He used to be, but he says ego is a structure that is erected by a neurotic individual who's a member of a neurotic culture against the facts of the matter. And culture, which we put on like an overcoat, is the collectivized consensus about what sort of neurotic behaviors are acceptable. So I guess I'll just start from the title. Are cultures limited programs? For human behavior. So human beings are behaving in a certain way, and in our way of categorizing their behavior, we use the idea of different cultures, you know? I think it was Einstein who said something like, if somebody can't explain something simply enough, they haven't understood it. I'm trying to think the simplest way I can explain culture is just this idea that there's this planet, there's this celestial object. After a long time, creatures arise, and these creatures are unconsciously moving, and then something, let's say, unique happens. Some people think language was imported, some sort of either divine intervention, interdimensional intervention, or something in the food or diet of the creature that caused the creature to behave differently. But something makes an object become conscious to itself. Imagine like somebody, let's say, bakes a cake, okay, and then the cake suddenly becomes conscious that it's a cake, okay, and starts screaming, "I'm gonna be eaten!" But what I'm trying to say is the idea that there were objects moving. There was no structure, meaning, pattern, conscious follow-up. It's as if there were creatures happening and they didn't care about the memories that their brain was generating. So from an unconscious creaturehood, we have come to the consciousness of a subjective human identity. So pretty much to explain culture is a term given to how people behave in a place. So you can think of it this way, that if somebody's like, yo, that's Persian culture, that's Canadian culture, what it's going back to is how human beings behaved in an environment. If we really want to know the most ancient culture that human beings have access to, we were like animals, like, being savage animals in the forest. If somebody really wants to honor the culture of their ancestors, they could just act like a wild animal, right? Their, let's say, far ancestors. But pretty much what I'm trying to say, there's something very important to consider, that pretty much intelligence is the opportunity for organization. Right now, I'm considering human intelligence because the idea of the human has been a sort of organizational decision in all the chaos, let's say poetically, the chaos of reality. One thing we all know, that before creatures in a world or on a rock in the middle of nowhere began communicating with one another, they were existing. Right, so there was a sort of, you can say hilariously, to be an animal is like having access to an existential language. Now, something allowed this existential language to be converted into an ideological story, right? So it's as if creatures were going, they didn't care, If a time traveler went back to the caveman and was like, "Hey man, can I shake your hand?" the caveman would shout and throw rocks or something. Do you know what I'm saying? It was as if there was no value there in the human consciousness, or let's say before human consciousness did not value the way it was happening and the way it was being. In modernity, what do we see? We see human beings that care for what they are and what they are doing and their effect. And if somebody says, like, where do languages come from, it was a sort of behavior, right? So it's kind of like what culture is the patterns of behavior throughout time of, let's say, again, a group of people in a part of the world. So culture is behavior, and it's kind of like we named behavior. So think of it this way, that let's say somebody kicks a soccer ball and we call that behavior like kicking. We use the verb, we're like, okay, that person's kicking, right? So we gave not only a noun a name, but we gave a verb a name. Now, if we are to say, when nouns and verbs are kind of, let's say, coagulated, compiled, like a collection of nouns and verbs, it in some sense is leading to the definition of culture. Culture is another way of saying the past is attempting to reform the future. And something hilarious about the human species, it's in a changing world, but it doesn't like change. Right? One of the hardest things for human beings to come to terms to is that not only the world changes, but the self in the world is also changing. We are ultimately wondering about, I think every human being deep down has a fascination for psychology and has a fascination for what minds are doing in the void. Culture is a limited program because in order for a culture to have a shape, the behaviors need to be repeated. For example, I'll give you a political example. We have the country Iran. Iran had its own Persian culture, and then there was an Islamic revolution. And now it's more like a sort of religious republic, but ultimately a religious dictatorship. And now the thing about the culture, if somebody was to wonder about the evolution of Iranian culture from 2022, like right now there's even protests happening on the streets. So if somebody was to wonder about the evolution of culture, culture is a sort of behavioral loop, right? It's a way of saying, culture is another way of saying that we don't want to surprise ourselves, so we repeat. You know, culture is like a language of behavior. A language can be seen as a limited system. Culture is a limited behavioral system. Now, in Iranian culture right now, let's say there's a theocracy in power, so the idea behind the maintenance of that culture is constantly encouraging, for example, religious behavior. It's another way of saying if the culture of, let's say, people in a nation changes, then their leadership requires to change. But if the leadership doesn't want to change the culture, or is ignoring how technology in the information age is changing the expectation of the human being and its expectation for behavior, right? Like, I think about reality, you know, let me say it this way. Any person who is, let's say, any honest person who wonders about power cannot ignore the fact that power is like a chair. It's like a seat. It's like a driver's seat. Okay? And so when you have power, you're in the driver's seat. When you don't have power, you're in the passenger seat. Now, the issue with cultural development is simply that human beings, in order to fit into the culture, have to sit in the passenger seat, but in order to live a new life, have to sit in the driver's seat. You see, it's systems inside systems inside systems. This is the nature of the human mind. The human mind is not just a biological entity. It is, in some sense, you can say, a dynamic, I pause to use the word wisp, but it's as if, like, the awareness to the dynamism of a system is what free will has access to before decisions solidify it into a sort of shape or outline. So anyways, where I'm going with this is to say that before culture, before any of this, there was just behavior. Behavior, through the use of memory of the creature, began becoming organized. When it began becoming organized, in some sense, we attained a sort of familiarity and comfort, right? That means one of the biggest things, impediments to cultural transformation, is the inability of the individuals to experience the discomfort of a new space, right? What is fear? Fear is like change before one is prepared for. If somebody is prepared for a change, they don't have a reason to fear it, or even if they fear it, like that, the percentage of the fear drops down based on how much you understand about a moment, So, existential movement being converted into abstract memory, so real existence, real existential behavior or movement is converted to abstract limited stories. And really the intent behind this episode, dear viewers, is like, sure, on one angle I'm trying to explain culture, but from another angle I want to suggest that if culture is a limited program of behavior, if cultures right now are prototypes of the people who were here before, right? It's as if, imagine every cultural system realizing it could have always updated based on the site it authorizes. So it's kind of like this. Imagine this is going to be a really bad metaphor, but whatever, I'll say it. Imagine there's a shepherd, okay, and there's 8 billion sheep, okay, and this shepherd is like, yo man, how do I move all these sheep, you know, in the same direction, in the same way? Now, strangely, let's say the sheep have become conscious. The sheep don't listen. So imagine like someone trying to tell a bunch of people to do something, they don't listen, and then the shepherd is like, yo, what do I do with the sheep? Like, they don't listen to me. So what the shepherd does is place the sheep into a fenced area. And when the sheep are in a fenced area, they begin to accept the limitations of their reality. It's kind of similar for a mosquito, right? They did this experiment. They put a mosquito in a jar, they closed the lid, and the mosquito kept trying, I don't know, mosquito or insect, some insect, and the insect tried to jump. Its head would constantly hit the top of the jar. After a very long time of this insect attempting to escape this jar with the lid on top, right, it stops attempting it, in some sense accepting the reality, and at the same time, the people conducting this experiment take off the lid of the jar, and the insect doesn't try to escape. Right? And so what I feel culture is a sort of behavioral container for an entity to be relatable to other entities, right? But the issue is that culture, let's say some person does something that becomes a you know, huge cultural thing, right? So imagine, I don't know, somebody back in the day, let's say in India, pouring milk on a statue of Rama. Okay, they do that. So pouring milk on the statue of Rama. So now that's a behavior, right? And in the culture, they're like, okay, you got to pour milk on this statue as a sort of ceremonial blessing and whatnot. And so imagine years later, the person who started the tradition has passed away, who started the cultural movement. And now the person who started the movement that has passed away, right, is no longer there to bring in a new cultural event, right? So it's as if people in the future, where their attention goes, suggests the quality of culture. What I'm trying to say is that it seems to me human beings are a bunch of creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere. They became conscious that they're creatures. In order to survive, they are active, they have expression, and so it's like the organization of the behavior of creatures in a space. We consider that as culture. But the issue with culture is that it's like a video game, and it doesn't get updated unless somebody steps out of the culture and does something new. And let me tell you something bizarre. When the world is obsessed with having everything be normal, right, we may suddenly forget that novelty is a huge part of the purpose of life. You know, somebody could say, should I live a life based on how the past wants, you know, or should I live a life based on what I can do, what the future can be? You see, it's a sort of definition of character. I feel culture, the limited cultures of human beings now, is based on what did the past want. You know, how can we make the past keep smiling as we go into the future? But the issue is that sometimes in trying to make the past happy, we upset the future. Terence McKenna, in his quote that I read earlier, when he says, and culture, which we put on like an overcoat, is the collectivized consensus about what sort of neurotic behaviors are acceptable. If we don't think about the neurotic part, it's kind of like a community's mind is the outcome of culture. Now, I do understand that people are like a democracy is better than a dictatorship, of course. But a democracy is not the voice of everybody, right? It's a sort of division. That means the democratic decision is a majority decision. So it's a kind of suggestion. So imagine, imagine, there's 10 people, they want to make a democratic decision. Imagine 5 of them, imagine there's a fire happening in a building. And there's let's say there's 10 people on a sinking ship. Or here, I'll give an example. Let's say there's 10 people in a burning house, right? Now, these 10 people, they're like, we have our own culture, we're the same community, we decide what happens to all of us. Okay, so now imagine these 10 people in a burning house, right? 5 of them want to leave the house. Okay, or I'll give you an example. Imagine 5 of them 6 of them want to stay in the house. 3 of them don't know what to do, and 1 of them wants to get out of the house. In a democratic situation, if they decide to stay in the house, they all burn and fail, right? So in some sense, what I'm trying to say is that the blind spot of democracy is how certain individuals could be ahead of the system. It's in some sense denying future vision in accordance to emotional preference through the present. This doesn't mean a system has to be good and bad, like a human behavior is kind of strange, right? Like we look at somebody do something violent, right? And we're like, yo, this is a bad person. But if that person was back in the day, like a violent person, and there was a war and that person was in a battlefield, then the violence would in some sense be justified, right? Like a bad person in battle is not that much of a bad person, in war. And I'm not saying like in regards to character. Human intelligence is so strange that it's constantly updating its agenda in accordance to the information, the new experiential realities it receives. A huge part of culture is language. The same thing that's happening for culture, we can kind of see, is the same thing that happened for language, we can see that it happened for culture. So language, the idea is that before nationalism, before kind of, let's say, the species acknowledging a proper nationalism, let's say people in a land, they spoke different dialects. People didn't have the same language. When nationalism occurred, then there was like one language for the whole nation, right? Now, if we consider behavior to be a sort of language, okay, or culture to be a sort of language of behavior, right? It's as if people were behaving in so many different ways, so many things were justified, but suddenly in the acceptance of a specific cultural identity, right, it was as if suddenly all the other dialects that were spoken became unnecessary when everybody accepted one sort of language, dialect, right? So similarly, it's like when a group of people accepted one sort of behavioral permission in this environment, so similarly, culture is the language of behavior, and it's the strictness of the language. I've had the privilege to be a bilingual individual, and being bilingual is like having access to two realities where symbols connect to objects differently, Human being is not just a collection of its memories, which are static images or may appear as static images or frames, but it's as if we are a collection of all the behaviors our mind has witnessed. Really, if we bring in the idea of freedom into this, it's kind of hilarious. Let me tell you why. If freedom equals the potential for infinite types of behavior, just conceptually, I'm not saying like some sort of freedom could be dangerous, and a type of freedom could be like blessed, right? But I'm saying the idea of freedom, when we have the idea applied to an object's mobility, it's the ability for the object to move in the space in any way it chooses. So similarly, right, when we look at culture is actually, think of it this way, a strategy to minimize freedom in order to build commonality. And it's kind of strange, because if we ignore culture, we are ignoring to some degree the value of human activity. Like right now, a lot of children of the future generations being raised in India are wondering what sort of decision to make behaviorally. India, for example, India is actually, Terence McKenna kind of explained it in a really good way. And to live in India is to like live inside a hallucination, a psychedelic hallucination. Or even the idea of culture being a sort of hallucination. But in India, they still have not forgotten, let's say, the whispers of the old world. The future generations have to decide. Let me say it simpler. Based on how a human being behaves, that suggests the type of culture they're in. Human beings are creatures that have an inner dimension, an inner life, and we have an outer life. Our outer life is based on how we have lived ahead in our inner life. So, excuse me, guys. So 8 billion physical entities on a rock in the middle of nowhere. Their experience of life is multidimensional. There's an inner reality, an inner realm, and an outer realm. Based on how we project ourselves behind our eyes, we behave in front of our eyes. Now, what culture is the permission of the type of person you can be, or the type of intelligence you can be, and what sort of level of expressionism you can have. People, a lot of people, they don't like the concept of religion. They don't like the idea of temples and whatnot, right? But what's hilarious is that every person's psyche is working in accordance to some sort of behavioral code. That means you enter the bank, there's a certain culture there. You enter a temple, there's a sort of culture there. It's pretty much the conscious agents and their acceptance of a sort of spectrum of value. It's hilarious. Just like human beings wear clothes to feel part of the environment. Like a businessman wearing a suit to a business meeting. Culture is another way of saying, how is your mind dressing up? What is the range of behavioral freedom that your identification with anything in reality brings? So freedom is the permission of new activities to arise, and culture is staying true to how a past activity provided a space, provided something, being a person who his mind is divided between two cultures. At some point I had to cherry pick kind of like what has value from two different systems of behavior and ideology. To be a cultural entity is to be an entity capable of living inside limitation. The idea of freedom is a very strange idea, because if it has to be attained, it's a suggestion that it's not there. The way that culture filters our mind, it's as if a person behaving into a cultural program, it's as if it's like a human body choosing that it can't move in certain ways. So what freedom means in the context of culture is the ability for new behaviors to transform the culture. And this is where I would say, people may think there's a roadmap to success, and maybe there is in the outer realms, but I'll say it in the inner realms. The greatest achievement of every human being is to be a human being that has never existed before. Our biology has never existed before until we were born, and so should our personality be similar to the past, or should our new eyes, fly into the world as if a new being has entered? what culture has done is that it has reduced the reverence for the new, for novelty. What cultures have done is that the cultures are speed bumps to the rediscovery of the true nature of the human being. And it's kind of strange, because me personally, I'm in a sort of love and hate relationship with language. I love language when I use it to design perception and reality, but I hate when language becomes the person, right? Like, one of the most dangerous things that I would recommend is that parents do, let's say to children, is in some sense that they tell the child what it is, right? And let me explain what I mean. Imagine there's a child, right? And this child has no sense of good and evil. And somebody comes and says to the child, "You're such a good boy. Good job, little kid. You're a good kid," right? Now that kid identifies with the language that moves its mind. Okay, and so if the child thinks it's a good boy, it may go on doing evil things and thinking, "I'm still a good boy." Do you see the nature of the mind, right? At some point, the evolution of the born intelligence, that means that what is the purpose of life is to be capable to look at it with eyes that nobody else has. That's the point of being true to self. People talk about, be honest, be true to yourself, but what is that self? What civilization needs is a new value for the experiential presence of human intelligence, and my recommendation is that we're reaching that time where the true eyes of what is moving through our sight, the true eyes of human intelligence, are imbued with the ability of the observer to discriminate. It's not the observed. I was watching this debate between a theist and atheist. And the atheist said this term of like a sort of celestial dictatorship. I believe it was Christopher Hitchens. He said, or I don't know who it was, but it was someone who said like religion is a celestial dictatorship. And what a dictatorship is one person's reality becoming everybody's reality. Dictatorship is another way of saying one person is trying to clone the mind of a nation to itself. And there's dangers in that, it's kind of hilarious. There's dangers if we don't think alike, and there's dangers if we think too much alike. There was a time where a part of me heard, I looked it up, and it was like, I think around 85, 75, some number around there, of the millions of people who had died in World War I and World War II. And for some reason, I felt like, what the excuse my language, but WTF, right? That there were that many types of new human beings, and their value was rendered into void because they were functioning in accordance to the mind of another, right? And I'm not saying we should not trust authority, but I'm saying that if we trust an authority that doesn't let ourselves be ourselves, that authority is not smart enough to realize who its authority is being implemented on. Like right now, it's kind of like old governments and new people. You see, that's what's happening in the world. People in their inner realms are advancing further than the behaviors in the outer realms. And what can a person do? Just like the millions of people who died in the world wars, a dictator cloning the psychology of everybody in the nation to be in only a certain way, that's equivalent to 80, like, it doesn't matter if 80 people died or 80 million people stopped being themselves. Like, it's the same sort of inner death, you know. World War II was an outer death, right? An outer dismissal of the potential of all those human beings that died. And so, in some sense, ideological possession is in some sense a sort of inner realm death. You see, man from the beginning of his time has been justifying the meaning of reality based on the quality of his experience. Our ancestors were in the food chain at some point, right? There were other animals hunting them, but they managed to use the intelligence in the moment to separate themselves from that sort of reality, you know, from those conditions. You know, it's kind of like this, that we are creatures in a natural world, but at some point, in order to access a greater, let's say, multidimensional perception of reality, right, we created a world inside a world. Like, what I'm trying to say to people is that a person has an existence in a world. They're in a world. They have an experience of their self, and they have the possibility of the experiencer of their self to move in a world. From a philosophical perspective, I was like, what is freedom? It's such a strange concept because a lot of things are conditional. If I say I have complete freedom of movement, gravity would disagree, you know? And it's kind of like what freedom seems to be is what consciousness can do in the unconscious, in the unknown. Before this episode, I wrote a sentence on in my notes. I'm going to read it for the viewers. Life is a way the unknown holds the known. Life is an unknown, non-physical position for shaped reality. What freedom means is direct experiential empowerment. But the direct experience can't be empowered if there is an ideological abstract existence limiting the behavior. On some level, it's not like I'm saying anarchy of the mind to be able to do anything is freedom, but it's like I'm saying that the human species, the strategy the species has had in governing itself is to define itself, and in some sense what stories are groups of mind. Nothing can organize human perception better than a story. We know this. I think everybody deep down knows this. The story we tell ourselves is the permission we have given to our soul, the permission we have given for our soul to move in our mind. You know, for the longest time, I was like, what is free will? You know, everybody's saying like, yeah, we got free will, I got free will, you got free will, you know. But it's like, what is the free will? And the free will is like accessing an invisible potential and then being capable at any time to make an invisible potential into a sort of visible kinetic actuality. Human beings can advance civilization pretty much in a way where they pretty much, it's like intelligence is like, okay, what dimensions is my intelligence extended through? So a human being wonders about the extensions of their intelligence. The person sees that, okay, the intelligence of the moment has extended into a physical format of an individual biological body. The term individual refers to the experience of the mind of the body, but it's like a physical biological body. So a part of advancing civilization is activating the unknown hidden potential of the biological body, right? This could in some sense in the future be like the legend of the shape-shifting humanity. So right now, I think somebody had mentioned it before, I don't remember it accurately, but there's something known as vertical gene mutation, I think, gene transfer, and then horizontal gene transfer. I may be getting the terms wrong, but the idea is that pretty much our genetics have a way, like right now, let's say a person is walking, and if we looked at what's his name, that X-Men character, that attractive blue girl, Mystique, I think her name was Mystique or something. So she was a character that by looking at something could instantly transform. Her genetics could move in a way that the genetics of the other people, the genes of other people, couldn't move. It was as if her DNA was intelligent enough to instantaneously adapt to new perception. Right, this is the whole difference between the vertical and horizontal gene transfer idea. But anyways, when I say the legend of the shape-shifting humanity, who knows? In the future, technology might be capable. Nanotechnology may hilariously kind of give us a permission to be human, but not to look human, you know. I want to read some quotes for the viewers. Terence McKenna says, our culture definitely takes an egocentric dominator view. The fear of the psychedelic experience is quite literally the fear of losing control. Dominator types today don't understand that it's not important to maintain control if you're not in control in the first place. That means it's like the world is bigger than one man's mind. Like the world is bigger, it's too big to fit into one man's mind. So us wanting to control the world is like wanting to control the values we have put into the world. Terence McKenna says the imagination is the goal of history. I see culture as an effort to literally realize our collective dreams. Yeah. There is a dimension of physical existence. We need advanced human beings advancing technologies in that area. There is a dimension of psychological experience. We need to have human beings serve the mind of the species. Think of it, you can serve the body of the species, the mind of the species, or poetically the soul of the species. To serve the body of the species is to advance physical technologies, outer technologies. To advance the mind of the species is to advance inner technologies. That's how you serve the mind of the species, which hopefully, that's my effort, at least in this lifetime to some degree. But to serve the soul of the species is to allow the individual to realize the value of the collective. Right now, we're 8 billion creatures acting like we're in a system, but we don't truly know the value of the system, and we don't know what roles our intelligence can play, right? A lot of people are looking for meaning, But very few people realize that meaning is a choice. What life means is a decision, and poetically, what branch your attention, chose to fly onto. Sorry guys, these coughs are out of control. The mind needs to keep itself company, of course, right? We all saw in the movie Castaway, right, when that dude was away from civilization, he turned the volleyball into his best friend. He began talking to a volleyball. And what it is kind of like the human psychology requires engagement with human psychology. It's kind of like one of the cruelest things, I guess, let's say one of the cruelties of humankind is that when it's like this. It's like sometimes I used to, for a year, for 2 years, close to 2 years, every day I was in downtown, and in my breaks I would in some sense just be looking at the downtown square, Dundas Square in Toronto, Canada. And I remember seeing, I wrote a poetic sentence about it, that the downtown of countries is where the defeated and successful walk in the same street, but they don't walk in the same worlds. It's like people with different internal constitutions are existing in the same physical reality. I remember I saw someone that I had just this instant feeling as if this person hadn't been treated like a human being, so they had allowed their intelligence to descend. They had allowed their behavior to descend. Something which is like an unspoken thing, or maybe people talk about it, I'm not aware, but the idea is this, that when our desires become dehumanized, humanity starts to forget itself. If human beings do not eat natural food, right, dehumanized variables enter the meaning of their life. It's very difficult, the task ahead for the advanced humanity. But because the advanced humanity is going to arrive, in some sense there's nothing to fear. But it's just like a difficult challenge, How does the human being stay natural in a world where behavior is having unnatural value? The game of the human species is how long it can stay human. This is it. There's a type of spirituality which is trying to constantly see itself beyond human, and there's a type of spirituality, I feel this is the rawest form of the most, like, the concluding force, the conclusion of spiritualism to some degree in this earth plane, that in some sense we are here not because we are incapable and we became human. We are here because we can capably be human. And to be human doesn't mean to be the clone of another system that accepts you, but it's another way of saying, what is the journey of your eyes that nobody else can see other than you? That's when the concept of guru teacher goes away, and the person realizes they're an unknown intelligence happening in an unknown world, and before they need a teacher, they are their own teaching. Culture is an open system. or it should be. Cultures that are closed systems, they're going to feel isolated and as time goes forth, you know. It's kind of hilarious. It's like survival of the fittest. It's like unless there's adaptation, there is no survival, right? And it's kind of like the ideological systems and cultural programs that human beings function through. If they don't adapt to the new consciousness of the human being, it's as if the human being is choosing to live in an old world when it can live in a new one. All right, guys, I need a quick intermission. I'll be back. Okay. I'll go back to a quote tunnel. Terence McKenna says culture is a plot against the expansion of consciousness. I would say it's a sort of unnatural method for the expansion of consciousness. Or if it's a plot, it's an unnatural interference. Terence McKenna says what civilization is 6 billion people trying to make themselves happy by standing on each other's shoulders and kicking each other's teeth in. It's not a pleasant situation. Terence McKenna says culture is a perversion. It fetishizes objects, creates consumer mania. It preaches endless forms of false happiness, endless forms of false understanding in the form of squirrely religions and silly cults. It invites people to diminish themselves and dehumanize themselves by behaving like machines. So this is where I would say I take a different crossroad than Terence McKenna. Terence McKenna saw the system as a failure, and he was trying to take people towards a sort of natural remembrance. I'm saying that, okay, regardless of how inefficient our cultures are, they exist. It's as if, what would a designer do? A designer would look at all the designs accessible and redesign. What we need is not to escape from, a failed, let's say, cultural program or system, failed collective program, but rather we need to realize that the failure is raw resources for the success. So in some sense, if I was in an inefficient world, I'll be like, okay, at least there's something here. Let's use that inefficiency to build an efficiency. And sometimes it's very easy, right? And let me tell you why. There was this, I think his name was I forget his name. It's this guy named Ibn Sina, okay? Abu Ali Ibn Sina, I think that was his name. But anyways, this guy, he was super polite, and somebody came and asked him, hey man, how are you so polite? And he's like, easy man, anything that rude people did, I did the opposite. And I guess similarly we can say, in an inefficient civilization, even let's say the power structures, hidden power structures in place, want us to behave in a certain way, right? I would say the idea is revaluing behavior. A homework assignment that no teacher in the educational system has, I think, ever given is pretty much, it's like, hey students, go home and wonder about what other way the world can happen. What other hidden meaning could there be to the world? Ideological systems are systems, okay? And systems are found in greater systems. Our psychological, let's say, system of using language to decode, to code ourselves, to position ourselves in reality, is that our psychological system is dependent on our physiological system. That means the systems that we access in our experience are dependent on the systems that allow our existence. Now, let's say that culture is telling you to do something, your memories in the past is telling you to do something. Imagine a person is found in a room and there's a bunch of people telling it what to do, right? Now, this human being has a choice to choose what others are saying, or they have a choice to have space, to in some sense separate space. I'm going to tell the viewers a hilarious event that happened to me. Okay, there was a family gathering, aunts, uncles, and something suddenly happens in the family gathering. There's a debate and there's a discussion. And in the discussion, suddenly it's like everybody's shouting at me, right? And everybody's gathered around me, kind of like imagine imagine a group of people kind of like in a state of anger, right? Surrounding you against the wall so you can't move, but not in a hostile way, just surrounding you in just the, let's say, in the anger of the conversation. And for a moment, I couldn't go anywhere, and there were a bunch of people like shouting and talking at the same time to me, okay? And I did something so ridiculous that now when I think back at it, I laugh. I sat down on the ground. So imagine like you're cornered against the wall, a bunch of people talking at the same time, shouting at you, and I just sat down on the ground, and none of them wanted to sit down, so they all went away. Guys, if people wonder what kind of strategist I am, I'm the strategist that sees a way of doing something and tries it. And if it fails, I'll be like, okay, that's part of the strategy still. I don't know. It's just there's so many ways our attention can move, and what freedom means is how our attention can move in accordance to the truth of our own inner realms, the truth of our perception. It could be that the concept of truth culturally could be what is keeping us artificial. Who knew that after 4.5 billion years there would be 8 billion versions of Earth in the inner realms of human beings? Anyways, sometimes I have this feeling. It's like, imagine the planet is intelligent and conscious. The planet is a being, and the planet knows it's going to be destroyed. So it's like, what's my greatest strategy of keeping my geometry alive? And it's like imagine a planet creating human beings, human beings experiencing the planet, then the human beings having to leave the planet, and the planet, let's say, gets destroyed, but it still exists in the inner realms of human beings. I think really what human consciousness is the conversion of an image a shape of reality. It's like the continuity of the shape of the world in eyes that are poetically not in the world. Anyways, guys, I'll read a bunch of quotes and end this off. Terence McKenna says, claim your place in the sun and go forward into the light. The tools are there. The path is known. You simply have to turn your back on a culture that has gone sterile and dead and get with the program of a living world and the re-empowerment of the imagination. Because without imagination, right, it's as if we're not wondering about new ways of things happening. I mean, what imagination is to see something new, you know? You know, it's like when a science fiction or a writer, you know, at least this is what really drew me into science fiction, because science fiction is kind of like a place where the world can happen differently and people can still acknowledge it without getting emotionally offended. Right? If we write something about the past, people will be like, yo, it didn't happen that way, it happened this way, wars start. If we talk about something in the present, people are still seeing the present, valuing the present in accordance to their past. But when we talk about the future is the closest state of mind to a sort of divine, towards a secular divinity. That means, let's say if like a miracle, if a resurrection of a prophet is like a miracle to somebody living in the past, it's like time travel is also as miraculous. The divinity of the future generations would be a re-identification with how the purpose of the mind is to invent the future that we will walk in. There's a quote from Guru Padma, I gotta read this. Guru Padma says, if you want to know your past life, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future life, look at your present actions. So the potential of our present actions is our future life. Can be our future life. I'm going to read quotes about culture. Rita Mae Brown, language is the roadmap of a culture. It tells you where its people come from and where they are going. Ludwig Wittgenstein, if we spoke a different language, we would perceive a somewhat different world. Benjamin Lee Worf says language shapes the way we think and determines what we can think about. Wilhelm von Humboldt says absolutely nothing is so important for a nation's culture as its language. Michael Gove says learning a foreign language and the culture that goes with it is one of the most useful things we can do to broaden the empathy and imaginative sympathy and cultural outlook of children. Rumi says speak a new language so that the world will be a new world. And what is language? It's the state of consciousness. So if somebody attains a new state of consciousness and then they communicate, they speak a new language, technically, it would lead to a new world. So really what human beings need to do, guys, is like we need to access new states of mind, and then from those new states of mind, which are technically inner ways that the world is held in a new way, communicate. We need to communicate from the freedom of the potential of reality, rather than the conviction that the past has already dictated our failure. Do you know, like, I honor my ancestors, but I don't honor them to that degree that I have to live the same life as them. You know, if a person lives the same life as their ancestors, it's like, what's the point of being a new human being if you're just going to repeat the behavior of an old one? You know? Samuel Taylor Coleridge says language is the armory of the human mind, and at once contains the trophies of its past and the weapons of its future conquests. Edward Sapir says language is the most massive and inclusive art we know, a mountainous and anonymous work of unconscious generations. Kofi Annan says we may have different religions, different languages, different colored skin, but we all belong to one human race. Exactly. Right? The fact, I think even the youngest children know that it's just like by looking similar to each other, by being creatures of the same species, we all share an unhidden bond. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe says those who know nothing of foreign languages know nothing of their own. Ralph Waldo Emerson says language is a city to the building of which every human being brought a stone. What an incredible quote. Incredible. Exactly. Now we just have to bring new stones, you know? You know, it's another way of saying, I guess one can say that smart people try to find worlds that they can agree to, because if they don't agree to, it's like stupid savageness destroys everything. There is a force that our species has been fighting against, and it's in some sense, what do we do with the savageness of an evolutionary animal, right? The ancient Greeks had this incredible term, they would say, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Samuel Johnson says, I am always sorry when any language is lost, because languages are the pedigrees of nations. Gaston Bachelard says a special kind of beauty exists, which is born in language, of language, and for language. Yeah, I mean, let's say somebody reads beautiful poetry and they tear up. It's like, why are those tears there? Because the poetry managed to create a vision of reality that, in some sense, intersected with the expectations of their past self. Ingrid Bengis says words are a form of action capable of influencing change. It's like, they better be. I'm giving so many talks. The Dalai Lama says whether one is rich or poor, educated or illiterate, religious or non-believing, man or woman, black, white or brown, we are all the same. Physically, emotionally, and mentally, we are all equal. We all share basic needs for food, shelter, safety, and love. We all aspire to happiness, and we all shun suffering. Each of us has hopes, worries, fears, and dreams. Each of us wants the best for our family and loved ones. We all experience pain when we suffer loss, and joy when we achieve what we seek. On this fundamental level, religion, ethnicity, culture, and language make no difference. Toni Morrison says we die. That may be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of our lives. Catherine Dunn, I have been a believer in the magic of language since at a very early age. I discovered that some words got me into trouble and others got me out. Yeah, because language is image, you know, and people who believe in their inner images, they get possessed. But people who can observe, just like Aristotle says, it's the sign of an educated mind to entertain an idea without accepting it. So it's another way of saying the brain is in this constant cycle of self-simulation, and when we can notice that we are not our thoughts, because we're aware of the thoughts coming and going, then we are free from what they imply. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. Language is the blood of the soul into which thoughts run and out of which they grow. Excuse me, I'll read that again. Language is the blood of the soul into which thoughts run and out of which they grow. Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf. Language is wine upon the lips. I mean, the only difference between language and wine is that language doesn't have taste. But its effects are similar. Somebody can get drunk on wine, somebody can get drunk on language. When they get drunk on language, their world has been limited to an ideological shaped system in accordance to the past. What is health for the mind is freedom for new visions to be actualized. People are on some level we can't blame the human species because we have to trust the world on some level to occur, right? It's like the soccer player has to trust where the ball's gonna go before it kicks it, right? So human consciousness has to trust its environment before it activates or lives in it, right? But if the environment is artificial, then we may, at some point in trusting an artificial system and being disappointed, distrust the true, the real, right? So it's like a strategy to get a species to never wonder about true is by making them convinced that the artificial is true. But beyond the artificial, really the truth of the moment is where our attention goes. If I think I'm a weak person, it's like my attention has gone to that archetype of selfhood. If I think I'm a strong person, my attention goes to that archetype, If I think the species is gonna fail, it doesn't know what to do, the human species doesn't deserve greatness, it's like that's the world my attention lands in. But I realize that the same amount of energy it takes for my mind to fathom itself weak is the same amount of energy it can take for it to fathom it's great. So it's ultimately a choice. Maria Montessori says the only language men ever speak perfectly is the one they learn in babyhood when no one can teach them anything. Mark Twain. Kindness is the language which the deaf can hear and the blind can see. Orson Scott Card. Among my most prized possessions are the words that I have never spoken. What an incredible quote. What an incredible quote. It's a good day today, guys. I'm finding quotes that that are finding me. Romeo Santos. It's really sad for me that in the United States, the Latino community is losing its culture and language, especially among kids born here. A lot of them can't even speak our language. And the reason a language gets lost is because behaviors that language is useful for are stopping. Pretty much people don't realize what's happening. Technology is shifting the attention to valuing a completely different type of human being than the cultural national entity. So it's as if we're living at a generation, especially those alive in 2022, where slowly the idea of the human being is changing, and the behavior of human beings, due to the desire for acceleration of ability, it's kind of like the world is acting as if it's going to like its technological will more than its free natural will. So really what's going on, it's like, imagine in the future there's going to be cyberspace technologies, and imagine you're a billionaire in the future, or imagine you're a dictator in the future. Okay, let's say a billionaire dictator. It's like, that's plausible, right? So imagine you're a billionaire dictator, right? And you want to control reality, but you see it so difficult. Like, you want to act like a god, but you can't do it in the outer realm. So in the future, imagine the dictator wants to control a nation and be all powerful. All he has to do is plug his head into a computer, put his head into cyberspace, and become a god of his own private server in cyberspace, private world, right? So I'm saying the desire to be an unnatural god, hilariously, is making us not desire to remain as a natural entity. So right now, one of the most important things human beings can do is to advance communication, and the advancement of communication is to realize that questions open worlds and answers close them. You know, imagine, a young kid asks some person, what is the meaning of life? And the person says the meaning of life is to only, eat apples. Right? It's as if that person believes that meaning of life, it becomes like a life where the person's only tasting apples. Do you know what I'm saying? We love ourselves, but we love the freedom to be a self as well. Based on what sort of cultural program is active and what sort of GPS destination our unnatural desires, what sort of unnatural GPS destination our desires are pointed towards. There is no greater strategy other than to be a human being that has never existed before. Novelty is very crucial. The human mind in the future is going to have multidimensional access. In the future, it's going to become a completely different setting. All the contexts that we think we have to choose between one or the other, in the future, they're going to have multidimensional access. In the future, when the human being gets bored, they can go and exist and experience life in cyberspace. People don't realize that cyberspace is it's like another world that's coming. So it's another way of life that's coming. So it's like cyberspace would be the third unnatural world that human beings are living in. First world is a natural world. Second world is a behavioral world, slightly bit more unnatural. A creature that behaves different than its environment. Then we have the dimension of language and the nature of the mind and how our personalities, our characters and stories, that's an unnatural dimension. And beyond that, there's going to be cyberspace. And cyberspace is how our minds, how we are going to live in our minds. Right now, poetically, excuse me, I'll say that again. Right now we're living in a world, but cyberspace is going to be how the world lives in us. Really, the consideration of human free will and how much of the human intelligence is going to be humanized or dehumanized in the future. People don't realize how intense of a issue this is. Right? It's like there's outer extinction and inner extinction. Inner extinction is when we stop being human. And too much technology and unnatural desire can dehumanize someone. Just like you could say, let's say a yogi went into the caves, sat down in samadhi for 3 years, 3 months, 3 days, right? And then the yogi woke up from the samadhi, right? And people were like, hey man, how was your weekend? And the yogi didn't have any response, as if he had been in the silence for so long that he was experiencing his experiential presence beyond his human idea of himself, right? So spirituality, too much mysticism, like that's the thing that comes with mysticism, where I say it's not for the faint of heart, because it's access to dehumanized states of how you're being before you're a human ideal. The future is going to be a sort of technological dehumanization. The past was a sort of natural dehumanization. Naturally, we were like dehumanized. Consciousness came and we're like, yo, I'm a human being. I got a name tag. I got a culture, behavioral program to act in accordance to. Do you know? It's another way of saying, is being a human being a phase in history, a phase in nature, an unnatural phase of nature, or is there a greater secret to the intention behind human design? It's another way of saying, like, we look at a square and we're like, yo, this is just a square. What does the square mean? The square doesn't make sense, or the square's meaning is to just be a square. But if we realize in a third dimensional reality, the square is being a cube, right? It's like the greater dimensions. It's like a three-dimensional being may understand the purpose of a two-dimensional being, but the two-dimensional being may not understand its three-dimensional purpose. And it could be that the human, let's say, evolutionary experiment is like a two-dimensional thing where we don't. It's as if the purpose behind why and how we are being human beings, its intent is for a greater dimension. That means lesser dimensions. It's as if the present is happening not because of the past existing, but because there is something for it to do in the future. You know, as a being, just the presence of attention being the whole moment, it's as if a being being like, why am I existing right now, right? And when they look at existence and they see different events are happening, and it's ultimately to be part of an event that will happen. You know, some people, you know, wonder why is it that in some movies, or not just in movies but sometimes in life, the bad guy is not punished and the good guy is punished, you know. And I thought about this for a while, and then something in the movie Star Wars made sense, made it clear to me, right? That imagine a bunch of good guys try to defeat the bad guy and they can't, as if the bad guy is destined to exist in the future regardless of the activity, right? So it's another way of saying the idea of destiny surpasses morality. Now, if we wonder that the human species has a greater dimensional, the destiny of like a two-dimensional square is to be a three-dimensional cube, or to realize it's being a three-dimensional cube. It's another way of saying our cultural programs, due to being limited, cannot satisfy the complete dimensions of this being that is present, this unknown attention that is presented in the human format, right? So I'm saying, like, I'm trying to figure out what's going on in this planet, and it seems that the way intelligence is moving is in accordance to realities that we cannot explain from here, from this position, right? So it's kind of like, it's like we can't know the value of the future, but we can be a value that gets to see the value of the future, right? Like, I don't know if after this life, right, like what are the options, let's say psychologically conceptual options of what happens after this life to consciousness, considering it's interdimensional, right? So okay, or I'll just say what can happen after like life, like what could the afterlife potentially be? The afterlife could be a return to the void, right? It could be that not everything is like a mirage in the desert of nothing, right? That could be a possibility. Another possibility is a return to a singular, and spiritual people feel this is the case, right? A return to a singular state of being, right? So it would be a return to a conscious singularity, which is, for the religious person, it's like everything returns to God. Everything came from an inconceivable singularity, and everything returns, all conceivable phenomena returns to the inconceivable singularity, right? So it could be that after this life, it's just the void that's chilling. After this life, the intelligence could realize it's the intelligence of the whole universe. Like, who knows? Maybe after this life, we realize we were being the life of the universe. We are a universal being. Like, it's not even a body can be us, right? Only a body can be within us, right? As a singular universal intelligence. So I'm pretty much saying there is a possibility that after this life, we discover that there has only been a universal mind. And just because we had an individual body, we thought we have an individual mind. Like, that could be the case. Another possibility is, in some sense, the concept of reincarnation. And reincarnation is kind of hilarious, because what you find in the afterlife is a repeat of what was there before life, right? So the concept of reincarnation is another way of saying the afterlife could be repetitive. Just like a teacher repeating something to a student, it's like the world is repeating itself to the transmigratory soul in certain traditions. So it's another way of saying duality is the truth. That means the truth of reality was not that where is human intelligence going, but the actuality of how things are changing is the reality. So it could be that the afterlife is just change. We just realize change is being changed, or change is just changing. Now, there could be another potential, that in the afterlife we come to realize that we are an infinite being, right? So you thought you were living one life on earth, but you realize the mind is living parallel lives projected simultaneously, right? Imagine a film projector, but the film projector doesn't project only one screen. Imagine this next level film projector that is projecting 10 films on like 10 different walls. I shouldn't say 10 different walls, but in one giant wall, imagine there's one projector is projecting 10 screens. Okay? So in the afterlife, it's kind of like the character in the film of the projection realizes that the nature of the projector is multidimensional, right? And this could open us up to this idea that we are not infinite beings, we are how infinity is being. Because I think the last thing a Buddhist trying to attain enlightenment wants to hear is the idea of parallel realities. The person's like, buddy, I thought I was reincarnating in one world, but you're telling me I'm reincarnating in infinite parallel universes? You know, believing in parallel universes, it becomes like the ultimate excuse, right? If somebody's like, hey man, why did you do that? Why did you fail? And the person's like, buddy, in another parallel universe, I'm succeeding right now. You know, you don't even know it. That means who knows, you know, maybe if there's parallel realities, you know, maybe in one parallel universe, I've already given the 10,000 talks, who knows, you know? But they're smaller talks. They're like 5-minute talks. You know? Literally, if my talks were like a minute, like I've given way more than 10,000 talks. You know. Imagine they're like, this guy gave 10,000 talks. You play his first lecture. First lecture is like a minute video where he's saying, hey everybody. Then that's the first talk. Then the second. The intent is to, you know, engage the world. We wonder about what's the highest quality of engaging reality, and we realize it's novelty. Novelty doesn't mean the past has to be destroyed for there to be new things, but it's another way of saying at any moment in life, we can look at life from another way, from another angle. And really, I think this is what wisdom is. Wisdom is like how, through patience, the person's mind is being allowed to see multiple probabilities before a decision. It's kind of like chess masters and this concept of information sets, like data sets, right? So it's like a chess master, like the genius of most chess masters is how they are categorizing the value of the movement of the chess pieces, right? But you can say a genius may be someone who is not convinced by the data sets and is realizing something never done before can be more efficient than something that's done before. Who was it? Einstein? He's like, logic takes you from A to B, but imagination takes you everywhere. And Einstein had to say that because his theory of general relativity and special relativity were acts and instances of inner reality. It was the imagination. So pretty much really what's going on, all human beings in any field, they are trying to find something new and implement it. We are novelty hunters. This is the best way to explain what evolution is doing. Evolution is not trying to enter paradise. Evolution is trying to see what else there is in the world. What consciousness, I should say, okay, let me say it this way. The evolution of consciousness is the search for a novelty that restructures the reality. What does freedom mean? Freedom is the permission to access the beyond. If I choose to consider myself as a known entity, the beyond is accessible as a completely different new way, new knowledge, a new system. But if I realize, let's say through some sort of mystical rhythm of reality, that what is actually here is an unknown being, and if this being has declared or is seeking any sort of archetype, it's as if the question is not how is my mind being a person, but why is there any idea present in consciousness at all. You see, it's the reverting into the sacredness of the unknown. Dear viewers, the divinity that has been denied the human species is an ability. It's the unknown potential of humanity. That is the roar of the advanced civilization, that this whole time we have been unknown beings in an unknown world. We have been unknown beings in an unknown world, yet the knowledge is defining us, right? It's kind of like, imagine the wrath of a god, but the wrath of a god upon himself. There's moments in my inner realms where I poetically destroy the world of my inner realms, right? And what I mean by this is when the emotion of a sort of wrath. In reality, I'm in the outer realms. I'm a very peaceful person. But in the inner realms, there's moments where I diffuse my outer realm anger and intensity of the emotion, and it's the intensity of a challenge, right? Regardless of what we think we are, the nature of consciousness is that it accesses a world. The world has limitations because it has a potential to journey through the world. Consciousness is taking the role of the limitless. Our minds are acting like eternal viewers. We don't realize it, but they're acting that way. The mind, it's like the body, it knew it was temporary, but the mind doubted the temporary because it had the force and ability to envision that which was beyond the physical lifetime. It's kind of like let's say it's like an archetype realizing its suffering is because of itself, and that's what I'm saying, the wrath of a god in a mirror, right? It's as if something so I'll give you an example. Most human beings, their relationship with chaos and order is that it's like a limited access. But to the inner realms, the mind can poetically, in one moment become an angel, and in one moment become a devil, right? In one moment it can choose to be efficient, in one moment it can choose to be inefficient, right? And so there has been moments where I would say it's like my idea of self, it's kind of bizarre. It's kind of like my soul got angry at my mind, right? And it was as if an unknown viewer looking at the content of the moment, and in some sense like asking its own unknown nature, why have you extended forth in this way? There was a scene in the Japanese animation called, what was it called? Princess Mononoke, okay? And in it, there was this spirit of nature, right? And there was a scene where the spirit of nature was walking in the forest, and everything, everywhere it was going, it was affecting, Pretty much, it's like when an unknown being wonders why knowledge is present, it has to acknowledge the unknown. And one of the most bizarre things, I shouldn't say bizarre, but one of the most challenging states of mind is for a human being to allow the unknown to be in a causal position. Our ancestors responded to the calling of knowledge. But now we require to respond to the calling of the unknown before any sort of experience can be had. Like, think of it this way. There was this idea, the prime directive, or something, that like in Star Trek, like people couldn't interfere with like an evolving species. In order for a species to be capable of acknowledging that which is different than itself, it not has to only be able to accept itself, but it has to be able to familiarize things that have no relevance to the human idea. That means it's hilarious. It's like, to be a human body, yeah, it's the behavior of a human entity, like the behavior of a human being. But to be a human mind is to have access to that which is deciding how to be human. As if before I say anything or make any sort of movement, there's a way the whole moment is just still and being, and it's like consciousness is noticing how it's being awareness to being, and then the free will acts. And the free will is mechanical until there is a context to reality the person can trust. So freedom of let's say freedom for the future generations is really dependent on how they trust the unknown. And if the past is being acknowledged, only the future is left as an unknown potential, right? We don't realize as a species what we did by creating knowledge. We minimized the world. This may be a fitting thing for me to say, but I wonder about how is the value of the mind earning. Being a creature in a world is a rare opportunity. It's a rare event. We are the sacred element of nature, What is the fog of language hiding? What sort of humanity does the species deserve? What's the point of being enlightened or efficient in an inefficient system? The destiny of humanity is how far the eyes of human beings opened. To build an advanced civilization is like the person is thinking, okay, what sort of project is the species going to complete? Right now I'm attempting to give 10,000 talks, right? In the future, there may be 10,000, variations of how an advanced civilization can function. It's like becoming responsible not for our individual known dimension, not just for our individual unknown dimension, but to now become responsible as a species in the void, to be responsible of our collective dimension, unknown dimension, and our known collective dimension. Dear viewers, what can I say? It's like life. At first I thought it was something that like it's a problem to be solved, but it's more like a mysterious condition. It's like a mysterious circumstances. At 4.5 billion years, and the greatest strategy that nature came up with was to experience itself, right? I think the purpose of the human body was to discover that it's a mind, and the purpose of the mind is to discover that its emotions are arising from transcendental perspectives. That means right now I'm sitting like I'm on my balcony giving this talk, and there's a table in front of me, but when I wonder about behind my eyes, where am I seated? A part of me knows that reality is found in the space of my attention. This might sound strange, guys, but ever since coming across mysticism, I feel I have transformed from being just rooted in just being positioned as stationed as an ideological entity, into realizing that it's my attention that leads, that is the captain of the self-simulations of mind, of the brain. And really, to speak is kind of like a spiritual experience. Why? Because your inner realms are moving faster than your outer realms. Like if my body wanted to move at the speed that the thoughts in my inner realms are coming and going, it would be kind of like the body of an old world can't catch up to the mind of a new one. It's an incredible time to be alive. We are realizing our destiny as multidimensional awareness. Human beings should not fear anything. They should instantly try to understand. The major goal should be that if we can live a lifetime where our individual lifetime was an individual victory and a collective victory, now is that time where every human being has to try to figure out how do we create more win-win situations than win-lose situations. How can we live as individuals and at the same time experience the most advanced potential of our collective life? The collective life of the species is watching us from the future beyond the dimensions, that our memories capture us in. Sometimes I feel like the soul is like a shackled titan, but what is shackling it? It's its memories, it's the information that it chooses to accept to be. But we are the observer of the forms that come and go. We are the mystery of the world looking at itself mysteriously. We are the question mark, that thought it was an exclamation point. And so, whoever you are, wonder about reality, wonder about its geometry. I encourage anybody who listens to these talks to go buy a sketchbook and, in some sense, try to solve the greatest problems of humanity. Why else is our mind capable of solving problems? You know, it's like it's not just about what the past said, but it's about what the future does. We learned this from technology. A technology entering human culture can change the culture by changing the state of mind. And people may wonder, like, why did Terence McKenna love mushrooms on his pizza? You know, simply because he was this person who's like, okay, if we're in an inefficient system, in order to make it efficient, we need new states of mind. To actually have new states of mind, we need new experiences. To have new experiences, the biological body should not be conditioned in a repetition. Right? It's kind of strange. Like, of course, we need discipline and habit to maintain, but at the same time, in order to create, it's like, you know, to look anew. Even destruction, it harbors within it novelty, right? That means this might be one of the strangest sentences I've ever said, but death is a new experience. Do you know why? Because the constitution of reality shifts, but every day we wake up, it's kind of like, you know, we human beings don't freak out if their mind doesn't exist, but they freak out if their body doesn't exist. We go to sleep, and in deep sleep, it's like there's no personality to suffer, to have dreams and joys. Like, that's the mystery of consciousness, right? That means dreams are a way of nature proving to us that there could be existence even if consciousness is not present. It's just for the psychological entity that Friedrich Nietzsche says, if a tree falls in a forest, and there was nobody there, did anyone hear it? Like, we have to be in the room of the conscious waking state to engage the form and information of reality, but in deep sleep there is no consciousness, and so it's as if we are left being how the unknown is already trusting itself before it knows. Wonder about your eyes, and you will discover the secrets of the world. Thank you for listening, guys. Much blessings, and namaste. Rise, mankind, rise.